My biggest concern about the investment and pension fund management business is not traditional ESG. It's much more about something much more immediate, namely the nature of the market and the fact that the markets are not functioning, and they're not functioning to the best of their ability for the benefit of the pensioners. And that's something that the funds should be actually doing something about. So, for instance, according to Marx, those with capital have power. Well, you, the pension funds, have the capital, but I hate to tell you, ain't got the power. The power lies with Wall Street and investment managers and investment bankers. They own you, they control you, you are price takers, not price makers. They determine the conditions. If you don't like them, they walk away because there's always someone else. The markets don't function because of so much short-termism, which means that capital is not being allocated effectively to good long-term investments that haven't been recognised. It's being allocated to companies that are hot, and they tend to collapse after a while. And all pension funds are involved in that in some way. It's a very difficult thing to control. But in order to control it, you first of all have to have the will to recognise that this system that we're operating in is not operating to its best ability or for the real interests of the final beneficiaries. It is operating in the interest of Wall Street. And by Wall Street, I mean the service providers, managers, City of London, all of those. To get control of that requires collective action. So again, it sounds Marxist. Marx was a great sociologist. He understood the nature of power. Economists don't even talk in terms of power. This should be a power struggle. When Lehman's went under, I was at a conference and I stood up in front of the conference of pension funds and I said, this is our opportunity. This is when the enemy is weak, and you have to recognise who the enemy is. The enemy is weakened now. They won't be weak for long because they come back and they bounce back very strongly. This is the time we should go away and write a manifesto of what pension funds demand from the capital markets. And everyone was silent. And I went to a couple of public sector funds and I said, so what about it? And they said, we are public sector funds, we can't get involved in politics. Well, let me tell you, Wall Street doesn't have any problems getting involved in politics. As Simon Johnson, a professor at MIT, said, the US government, Washington, is the best government money can buy, and Wall Street's bought it. And they still own it. They still control it. To give you a couple of instances, we, the pension funds, have allowed the bankers in the City of London to determine what is the risk-free rate, LIBOR. We allowed that to happen. And now there's a stink because now we know they were doing something rotten with it. Is that a surprise to anyone? It's just a surprise it took us so long. They control it. The Volcker Act in the US, which tried to separate retail banks from investment banks, has now been watered down so far by the lobbyists in Congress that Paul Volcker himself says he doesn't understand it. It's now 400 pages long. No one will understand it. And that's a classic way of destroying something, by obfuscation. Just make it so confusing no one can understand it. The SEC went around speaking to people about the Volcker Act. By their own report, they met with 390 financial services organisations. They met with 19 pension fund organisations. So there is a failure on the part of the pension funds in not asserting their power. They have to be able to do it. The only way they can do it is collectively, because if a manager comes to you and you don't like what they're doing, they're charging too much, the fee structure is wrong, they will say goodbye and then go to another, and they do that. When I was a CIO, I experienced that. I said, I'm not paying commitment fees to private equity managers. They walked away. They said, that's very interesting, and went to somewhere else.